Welcome to the Journal podcast from the Chartered Insurance Institute, a place for thought-provoking discussion from the world of insurance. I'm Tim Groves, Programme Development and Partnerships Manager at the Chartered Insurance Institute. And today I'm speaking to three members of the CII Claims Community Board. We have Richard Napoli, who's Chair of the Claims Board, who is Claims and Legal Services Director at Markel, Chris Hall, Chief Executive at Questgates, and Ashton West, Director at Fidu Consultancy, and judges the British Insurance Awards panel. All of them have been involved with recent insurance awards, and today they're going to be sharing some top tips for anyone thinking of nominating for future award success. So here is my conversation with Chris, Ashton, and Richard. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on the podcast today. This idea came about when we were thinking about topics to discuss for either podcasts or webinars. And as most of you are either involved this year with claims awards ceremonies or events, we thought might be a quite interesting topic to look at what are some of the key things that people need to think about when they're applying for these events, and also a bit more of awareness as well about them. You guys have either been judges in the past or you're judges of this year, so we'll go straight in with a few questions. So Ashton and Chris, from your perspective of being a judge, what's the very first thing that catches your eye or maybe makes an entry immediately stand out, both positive and negative, if you could?
First of all, thanks for the invite today. It's great to be here. Having spent 15, 20 years doing judging, you do get a feel for the things that instantly leap off the pages, ticking the right boxes. And the first thing I'd say is that it is very much like the exam question, really. Is the exam question being answered? And all of the judging I've done, Tim, has always had criteria for each of the categories. So if it's the Claims Insurer of the Year award, there are set criteria for that category. And the first thing that you're looking for is, are they doing what the criteria is asking them to do? Be staggered. The entries actually don't do what's asked of them in the criteria requirements. Beyond that, I'd simply say it's fairly simple. It's what's the problem or the event that you're trying to address. It could be a problem. It could be an event that you're referring to. So what's the problem you're trying to solve? What's your response to that? How did you deal with it? And thirdly, what was the result? What have you improved? And give evidence as to what's changed as a result of what you did. So they're the three things. What's the problem? How do you deal with it? And what's the results of it? I want to say what are the results of it? I mean, evidence-based results. So you want to see some metrics around the evidence of what happened. And if you tick those three boxes, that's what you're looking for. In very simplistic terms, I mean, we can come back later on to some examples of that, but that's what I would say. Very simple.
That's great. Thanks, Ashton. And what about yourself, Chris?
Yeah, I'd agree with that totally. It was quite interesting having entered awards both successfully and unsuccessfully. It was really interesting to read large numbers of entries and see what other people had done. And I think the first thing that struck me was nobody should be put off entering, because whilst there are a lot of really good entrants that I judge, anybody could put that together. They're not looking for something that is phenomenally whizzy. In actual fact, personally, I would kind of say those that try and hide behind too many whizzy graphics or whatever without any substance, it's all about the substance. And picking up Ashton's point, it is a bit frustrating when you read lots of things telling you how successful the company is, how big the company is, how wonderful the company is, and then they leave themselves with about a paragraph to actually talk about what they're entering for. So focus absolutely on what the award is for. And I think the big one is to stand back from it and just think if you're evidencing what you're doing, because see an awful lot of very, very clear statements, with the best, this has delivered this result, this has saved this amount of money. But it doesn't mean anything if there isn't any evidence to show that you have done that, whether it's supported figures or whether it's quotations, or whatever from that point of view. So I think looking for things to be evidenced is a kind of really, really important one. And then I think the other one is just think about what your organization is. One of the entrants that I judged described something that was so good about them. I think it probably was good for them. But when you looked at it, you thought, yes, but this is totally incapable of being scaled. So it's very, very good for a very small number of people. But if you're going to do a major claims initiative, then you need to be able to show that it's going to impact the industry wider than just a very, very niche area.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So I suppose depending on the category, depending on what you're looking for and what ultimately you're going to be sort of marking on, I can imagine it's really interesting as well, reading some of the stories, especially because you're in the industry, and to hear certain things. Yeah, I can imagine there's some quite exciting stuff you read and actually think, wow, that's, quite impressive. So hopefully you feel impressed by some of them when you're reading them. So, and I guess obviously the application depends on whether it's coming as a company or whether it's coming as an individual as well. So I'm just going to move on to my next question. So maybe if I start with Richard on this one. So when it comes to submitting a nomination and describing someone's achievements, what would you say are some of the things that are most important and impactful?
Well, when it's funny because you just said, we read lots of exciting entries. I think one of the things that Chris alluded to is we read a lot of entries, and it's amazing how many of them, literally, you could scrub the name off at the top. It could be somebody else. For me, I think if you're going to put an entry in, absolutely agree with Christian Ashton, you should be setting out your achievements, but you also want it to be a bit different to everybody else's. So I don't mind if it's a small company or a big company. I think actually they're all judged on the same criteria, but actually setting out really clearly why it was so important to you, what you did, and why it's made a change. So, one of the mistakes I saw was people go, it saved us £100,000. Well, if you're a multi-billion-pound business, it's peanuts. If you're a company with a 200 grand turnover, that's really, really different. So you've got to get that context in there and how it made an impact for you. And I still think also find a way to present it so that when your judges are reading 30 entries on the same question or the same challenge, yours looks slightly differently or appears slightly differently or even structured differently so that we don't go snowblind. There's a real risk of snowblind when you're reviewing so many entries on the same category.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Ashton and Chris, anything to add to that?
I think on the individual entries, I don't know what Richard thought, but there were some phenomenally strong entries. That's probably one of the most difficult categories to judge because you could have given it to any one of them from the point of view of what people are doing. But again, it's about evidencing. So, when you saw someone that was entering for the best claims manager or whatever from that point of view, when you saw a lot of quotes from staff and you saw a lot of quotes from clients and you saw the results that had been achieved, that was very, very powerful. Being across the fact of evidencing those savings or evidencing that reversing a high turnover of staff. And there was a real lot of quality put forward from that point of view, which I think from the point of view of us on the Claims Community Board, Ashton and I have probably been at the end of our careers are looking at the younger ones. And there's a lot of talk about the fact that we don't bring in the talent and about the age demographic, that there were an awful lot of really good young people coming through with really good new ideas. And that was quite exciting.
Going back to a comment you made, Tim, though, it is a privilege to actually judge these awards. I mean, Richard's quite right that, some of it, it's just the same stuff over and over again, but you get a fantastic insight into the great work, as Chris has just said, that's going on in the industry. So it's quite exciting in that context to see the range of stuff that is being done. One thing I would say, and I think it's been touched on in slightly different words, avoid this being a marketing brochure. It's not a marketing brochure. Whilst you do want to be what's different, don't let your marketing people turn it into a marketing brochure. You've very much got to stick to answering the questions effectively, dealing with the criteria that is requested, and avoid phrases that you can't substantiate. I don't know how many times I've read, this is unique in the market. How do you really know it's unique? And this is transformational. This is revolutionary. Phrases like that, unless you can prove it or substantiate it, you are just going to make the judges be turned off by that sort of phraseology. So it is not a marketing brochure, as I say. You need to stick to the questions. And as has already been said more than once in this session, you need evidence. And the phrase that I've used most, and I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these, the phrase I've used most in my notes is insufficient metrics, no metrics. So they'll say a phrase that we've done this, but there's no numbers that sit around it. So you need real evidence and you need real numbers. And very importantly, as Richard said, you need to contextualize it. Saying, we've had a 50% increase. Well, what does that mean? If you've gone from 10 to 15, that's a 50% increase, which, depending on what it is, may be meaningful. But if it's the number of new customers, it's not very meaningful. It has to be contextualized, and you need to stand back and think about it in the context of the readers. Can they see what this really means?
Also quite interesting, Ashton, that very rarely do you see entrants put forward what the problem is and what they did to research the problem and why there needed to be a solution. So they go straight into how great their solution is.
Yes.
But they don't actually say, why do we develop this? Why did that need come about?
That's the point about it being these three things. What's the problem you're addressing? What did you do? And what were the results of it? If you stand back every time and make sure you're doing those three things, you won't go far wrong.
So you make it sound quite simple then, really, when it's so, setting the scene is really important, providing the evidence and the problem that you've actually solved. I've not actually been a judge at award ceremonies, but I do judge the new gen applications when they come in. And one thing I think listening to you guys made me think about is that you get some applications that are very, very short, hard getting information. And then you get some people that actually write too much and it almost puts you off. So it's just, I guess it's about that right balance of quality information, not quantity. And that, you're getting straight to the point, like you just said, those three areas. So that's great. Great answer.
I think people shouldn't be afraid to enter. I mean, I think one of the things that, again, noticed in some of the entrances, in some categories, you had a lot of applicants and you looked at them and you thought there's 6 of these that could easily have won. Then you look at others where, unfortunately, there's only been 3 applicants and you just kind of think there are other things going on. So, I mean, I think I would encourage people to enter from that point of view, that you can't second judge how many people are going to enter and what other people are doing. But if you're not part of it, you can't do it. And there is an awful lot of, having been to winner awards, having gone to awards when we haven't won and whatever, there is an awful lot of buzz about it. And this thing about, the company's won, it's quite amazing how individuals that work for that company, the impact it has on morale, winning an award. I wouldn't underplay that from that point of view.
It's great. Thank you. So the next question I've got here is, sometimes you're looking at a huge amount of entries in some cases. So what I was interested in, is there maybe one element or a particular piece of evidence that you think really elevates an application above the rest, makes it stand out more?
I think we've touched on this a little bit already in the previous question. I mean, for me, it's great to see all the positivity in these applications, but a lot of them are very much the same or have the same theme or we are unique sort of thing. I think really thinking about what you're trying to show off and articulating in a clear and concise way with metrics makes it easier. There's so much waffle in a lot of these entries that actually the ones that tend to win are the ones where it's a really obvious problem, benefit, solution, evidence. And you can see it's actually quite an exciting thing as well for them, for the business. So for me, it's about how it's presented.
I think maybe, Tim, also, don't be afraid to put other information in to support it. So you see in entrance, people will say, we've increased customer satisfaction to X%, but you don't know what the market percent is and how that compares. So it'd be a lot better to start from the point of view of, average customer satisfaction is X. And by doing this, we increased it to 8 percentage points above that or whatever. So I think one of the things that surprised me a little bit at entrance is people don't use what else is happening in the market and what competitors are doing to show that what they're doing is better.
That's a really good point, Chris. That's a really good point. The other one that I would add, Tim, is the value of testimonials. As part of the evidence, I've talked about metrics, but testimonials are really good as well, particularly external testimonials. I'm not really interested in looking at a statement from the chief operating officer telling me how good their claims transformation program's working. I am interested in customers telling me how well their claim was dealt with as a result of the changes that were brought about. That's what will make a difference, external testimonials.
And just on that point, I mean, I saw a few where it was brilliant service, a customer, versus brilliant service, Steve in X sort of thing. I think actually, if they're not willing to put the name to it, it's less convincing than those where people are actually willing to stand up and be counted. That you're going to put a testimonial in, make sure it's one which you can stand by.
Yeah, good point.
Interesting advice. I hadn't really thought about customer impact and testimonials. So, yeah.
The information is confidential from the point of view of we haven't and don't discuss what are in other people's entrants and they're not published and whatever. And I think looking at some of the entrants, people are almost afraid to give information away. And you kind of think, well, you're not helping us to find out how good this is. So I think, to Ashton's point of view, that if you've got 6 stock customers and they're prepared to give you a testimonial and it's got their name and the company against them, there's a good chance you're going to win because you're going to really impress us.
Okay. So next question is thinking about smaller firms or sort of maybe newer initiatives who don't necessarily have decades of data or a huge client base. How can they effectively demonstrate impact and successes compared to maybe a larger firm with a longer history? Maybe Chris, we'll start with you on that one.
I think there is a kind of belief that it's going to have to be won by a bigger company because of the resources that they've got. And as Ashton said, we're not looking for marketing, we're looking for information. So I think if you're almost a startup, in your first 2 or 3 years, I don't see any reason why you can't still win if you've identified why you've done the startup, what the problem you've identified is, why there needs to be a solution, and the solution that you've come up with. You might not yet have the results that show it, but we can still look at it from the point of view of saying, well, that will address that problem. We can see why you've done that. And I think we all want to encourage newer, smaller companies. So I don't think there should be that concern that if you're not one of the top 6 major insurers, you're not going to win. If you look at who win the awards, whether it's best broker or whatever, it quite often is the smaller companies. They make that bit more effort to come up with something that's different.
The word count on the entries as well is a great leveler, because if you've only 150, 200 words, it doesn't matter how big a business you are, there's only so much you can write about it. So I think there's an equal footing there, and everybody, whether you're big or small, still makes the same mistakes. If you act like it's a marketing exercise, you'll waste a lot of those words. If you're very succinct and direct, you get the maximum out of those words. So to me, it shouldn't stop you being small entering. In fact, it just means you have to focus a little bit more on evidencing it and just kind of convincing why it is important for you that this thing has happened.
You do need to stand back a little at what you're saying. I mean, one of the entries that Richard I did said that their USP was that the CEO spoke to every claimant personally, which is a great thing, but it's actually not a very good long-term business plan.
How they should go about it is exactly the same, whatever the size of the organization. And from a judging perspective, you don't start off thinking, whether it's small, large or medium or whatever. You go to look at whether they're answering the question, as we said right from the outset here. And so they should go about it in the same way, apply their mind to the evidence of what they've achieved in doing it. In some senses, it's easier because it's easier to make a transformational change if you're only small than it is for Aviva to make a transformational change, for example. And the expectations are different as well. And British Insurance Awards, I mean, we've had small brokers who specialize in caravans winning more than once, and people who do drain repairs, small companies. I'm just picking those two at random. Small organizations that have got as much chance of winning as anybody else, frankly. So don't be afraid to put an entry in just because it's a small business. But the way you go about it is exactly the same, would be my advice.
And everybody starts with a clean sheet. I mean, before I was involved in judging, like everyone's we've heard, oh, well, because they're a big sponsor, they have to get an award, or because they're the biggest company, they have to get awards. There are no pressures like that at all. It was not mentioned, not taken into account. Certainly the judging that I was involved in was a completely free hand.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you said that. I think that's really a point for us all to make, that none of us, I suspect, have got the slightest evidence that it's anything other than uninfluenced by sponsorship or anything else. We look at the entries and we judge them on merit using the criteria that we've just talked about.
And that's really encouraging for anyone who listens to this who thinks they're from a small firm and thinks they can't compete with the Avivas and so forth. So thank you.
I mean, there is, just thinking about it, there is a piece you do sometimes sit there and see the same people win over and over again. And you kind of want to roll your eyes sometimes, particularly if you're not a fan of the company personally. But I think the lesson really we should be thinking is why is it they win every time? It's probably because they're actually approaching it the right way, doing it the right way. And in some respect, we're probably better emulating their submissions or learning from what they're doing rather than rolling our eyes at the one again.
Yeah, again, 100% agree with that, Richard. And the other thing I would say is that some of the people that I've heard complain about that, therefore conclude it's not worth entering, so they don't enter it. Well, if you don't buy a ticket, you're not going to win the lottery, are you? So it's self-fulfilling prophecy, that one, I'm afraid.
This kind of relates to what we just sort of started to touch on. And this is thinking about companies or individuals who've applied quite a few times in the past but not received an award. What tips could you give them about what they can learn and maybe improve for future submissions?
Well, first of all, if you've entered before and not won, and that's happened a few times particularly, don't give up, but do listen to some of the advice that's given here and make sure that you're doing those things. And if you're satisfied you are, there's nothing to stop you, actually, certainly of the organisations that I've been involved with, speaking to them and saying, what can we do to improve our approach? And very often there will be feedback given if you ask for it as to what you're looking for. And in that context, something we've not mentioned, but I think it's quite important, is that sometimes people put the entry in too early. So if you put a new system in, for example, that's providing customer service in a different way and beneficially, if you launch that, where are we now? We're in July. If you launch that in April of this year, frankly, you've got not a prayer of winning that award, because you can't possibly seriously evidence the benefits that have arisen in that timescale. And that's quite a common mistake. And I give that as an example because I know that's where we do give feedback and say, look, try again next year or resubmit it in the future, words to that effect. Because people are keen, they've just done something. And there is a balance as well. If you wait to collect 5 years of evidence of what's happened, it'll look stale. So there is a balance between the two. But unless you've got a body of evidence to show, and I'm sounding repetitive here, evidence of the success of what you've done, then don't put it in. It's too early. You've got to have collected that evidence, meaningful evidence. So that's quite a common mistake. But yeah, encourage people to try again and learn from others' experience.
No, I think that's really good advice, all of those points. Anybody else? Did you want to add anything, Richard or Chris?
One comment I would make, and maybe a tip that people should do, and it ties up all the things we've talked about, evidencing what you do and testimonials and research and whatever, is get somebody who's not involved in it at all to read your entry. Because a lot of them you read and you think, I think you know what you've done, but you've not actually put it across to us here. Or it's not actually relevant. And you just think, don't give it to someone in the team. Give it to someone that's got nothing to do with it and say, can you just read this and see if it makes sense and what it does? Because there are quite a few of the entries when you looked at it and you just thought, this has been almost checked like exam paper where people have changed words and whatever. Nobody's actually stood back from it and said, does this actually say what we want it to say?
I mean, I go one further than Chris. I mean, I'm a firm believer of continuous improvement. And if your company isn't winning something, you need to look at your whole process and are you doing it right? So don't just quickly review submissions. Look at actually what else could be going wrong. So, for example, a lot of them at early stage, you've got to do presentations. Are the people you're sending to the presentations the right people? Are what you're presenting the right things? It's not just remember about the Word document. Speak to ex-judges. There are many ex-judges around there, but quite happy to look at the entries and say, you're miles off, you're miles there. Look at what judges there are this year entering it. They often splash on social media who the judges are. What things interest them? I mean, I know everybody has internal biases. What will interest those people and slightly tailor your submission that way. Perhaps it's a bit naughty to target your submission, but if you want to win, approach it with the view that you want to win. Don't just approach it as another media exercise, another marketing issue. Look at the process and tailor it to work.
And look whether you have actually got something that is an award winner. And I think there is a little bit of we need to put an entry in. So what's the best thing that we've got rather than have we really got something that's a winner? And I certainly see things in the market happening that have not been entered for awards. And you think that stands out for somebody to put it in. So I think it is that just getting the people that are involved in the coalface dealing with the claims, knowing what they're doing and actually saying, look, we're doing something really good here. Wouldn't it be worth trying to celebrate it?
Or asking them when you're trying to come up with the ideas. It's amazing how you have a marketing team and we think you're doing a submission about X. Precisely not what you want. What you're doing that's really good. Let's shout out about it.
Well, I think there's loads of good things in the answers there, guys. And I think it's all feedback, even if they haven't applied yet. But again, I think that key thing is ask for feedback if you're not successful. I know with the new gen applications, quite a few of them do ask for feedback. And I've even seen 2 people who've actually got a place the following year because they've listened to what you've said, and, where there's a few gaps and how they can strengthen themselves and their application. So it's really good to see that people are taking that initiative. Okay, so thinking about what are the biggest benefits for companies that win an award category beyond just the recognition itself, what would you say are the biggest benefits from your perspective?
For me, looking at this quite straightforward is what is your objective going into entering those awards? If you're just entering them for no reason, you probably shouldn't be entering them in the first place. So for me, when we enter them, is it supporting an internal message? So Chris has already alluded to the point that how proud your staff are of what they do. Isn't it great to get that recognition reaffirming it? So it's a morale boost for your team. Tenders. So for example, a lot of people use the awards for ESG arguments on tenders. Market awareness. We have a little law firm in Markel, so Lily's getting quite big, but we're quite proud to have it up there against its competitors in the market. So actually raising its awareness amongst its peers, but also the market wider. Marketing. It's amazing how you can use it. So there's a real variety of purposes. And to me, winning the award is great. It's what you do with that award win afterwards is the thing you probably want to think about. And that's certainly how I approach these sort of things with my areas are applying for these awards.
I think it's quite interesting when you're looking at recruitment as well. I think more and more people, when they join a company, are looking for what the company's like, not just is their salary higher than anybody else. I certainly see that where companies win awards because they're different, because they're innovative, because they're service orientated. certainly the new generations coming through see that as an important one. And from my point of view, yeah, there's an external marketing thing, but I think it is really a real endorsement for the staff of why they want to work with you and what they're doing. And as Richard says, I agree with that from the point of view. And it's a bit like we're saying, evidence what you're doing. When a client's asking you, well, you say your service is good, but how can you evidence your service is good? And if you can actually say, well, we won this award for it and that award for it, it's an endorsement. I think the biggest thing is I encourage more people to enter because there are people that can win it. And we've talked about the fact that companies don't enter because they think they don't win. And the fact is, it's a clean sheet of paper each year. There's absolutely no reason why they can't. They'll be amazed the impact it has on staff morale to win one.
I can't really add anything to what Chris and Richard have just said. They've covered it. I mean, clearly there is a cost to entering the awards in a number of ways. Calculating the value you get from it is very difficult if you try and do that in financial terms. Yes, it doesn't do any harm to the brand. It's good from a marketing perspective. You can certainly get a lot of activity on social media with the awards ceremonies themselves. And particularly if you're shortlisted and win, there's a massive benefit, I think, internally that's already been covered, which again is difficult to value, but it clearly helps with employee engagement. So overall, I think whilst it is difficult to do the cost benefit analysis for the reasons mentioned, I think there's clearly a value to this. And I would recommend that everybody looks at how they can enter, what they've got to enter, and do it in a way that we've talked about.
That's great. Thank you, Ashton. So where can people go to get more information and submit nominations for future awards?
I think it depends which awards you want to enter. I mean, social media, the company do a good job advertising these awards. So I kind of keep an eye out on LinkedIn, the insurance magazines and media.
I think picking up that, the fact is that there's almost a diary of the awards that are each year. So it wouldn't be that difficult to research it and look at what the dates for entry and everything is. They are fairly heavily advertised on the likes of LinkedIn. And when it's particular journals, whether it's like the Post Magazine, Insurance Times, Modern Claims Magazine or whatever, they do it in the magazine. But I would suggest the likes of LinkedIn's probably best, because the days of everybody subscribing and getting to see a copy of the magazines are kind of long gone. But they are all on the likes of the business social media. There are quite a few awards. Again, I guess one thing we haven't really talked about is the fact that look at what order you're entering and make sure that you've entered the right one. You know, if you're a claims business, as we are, then it makes sense to be entering the specific claims awards. If you're someone working, for example, in fraud, there are specific fraud awards. So look at what sector you're looking in and make sure that you enter an award that's relevant to the sector you're working in.
Just following on from that, I think it's a point to be made that it doesn't have to be insurance awards. You know, there's all sorts of different industries. If you're wanting to raise your profile in a particular market segment or in a particular area, consider awards that aren't necessarily the insurance-focused awards. You might have to do a little bit more searching to find out what they are, but be strategic around it. But I think the same rules that we talked about in this podcast probably apply around the submissions.
Excellent. Well, I think this day and age, most of these award ceremonies are pretty well advertised across social media or, like I said, in magazines. And something I think which a lot of them probably do now is we'll show you last year's winners. So that's probably a bit of advice as well, actually, is look at what people have won for in the past. And that might give you a bit of an insight into why you should be applying and understand the levels and the kind of things that win these awards. And maybe, I don't know, maybe reach out to ex-winners. That might be an idea as well if they're on LinkedIn. A lot of them will be obviously posting about it because they'll be celebrating and wanting to share with everyone that they've won. So that could be another idea. Great. Well, listen, there's some fantastic stuff in there, loads of great information, and hopefully the listeners will get some good insight and feel motivated to apply for the next round of award ceremonies as and when they come up. So thank you, Ashton, Chris and Richard. It's been really a pleasure talking to you, and great to touch on a subject that we haven't actually written or spoke about before. So thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
So thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Journal Podcast. You can find useful links in the show notes and any related articles on the Journal website, along with further podcasts. Please always like and review and subscribe. And until next time, thank you again and goodbye.